Hello, my name is McKenna Webb, and I'm an occupational therapy student at the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center. And this presentation is pretty much just for uh, teachers or families or anyone who works with kiddos or in pediatric settings that's kind of looking to expand their knowledge on sensory skill building and kind of is looking for some strategies to implement across different settings. So this brings me to kind of just the overview of where I'll be taking y'all through this presentation. We're just going to start off identifying the sensory systems and kind of getting educated on what those are. And then we're going to go through three different scenarios, which I hope you find applicable. We're going to just talk about behavior and tips for navigating hyposensitivity and hypersensitivity, as well as just going to provide you some tools at the end for different things you can take with you into the different settings you find yourself in. So, some different objectives that I hope you walk away with today are just simply being able to identify the eight sensory systems and understanding the importance of sensory needs in the home, at school, or in the community. And I also hope that you take at least three sensory strategies to implement within realistic environments. So, just some basic tools that you can take with you, just three of them. I really hope this is a helpful presentation. A lot of these tips and tools can be applied to kiddos of all types. So, whether they have a disability, whether they don't have a disability, really any type of child who, like I know, for example, I have sensory differences, and a lot of my friends and families members do as well. I've noticed everyone has their things, and so I just hope that this is applicable to just children in general. So that brings me into the next topic, just covering the eight senses. So I don't know about you guys, but I personally did not know that there were eight senses before I went into occupational therapy school. I thought there were five. So, but there are eight, which there are the basic ones we all know about. We've got auditory, which is what you can hear, visual, which is what we see with our eyes, gustatory, so that's kind of just like taste, stuff with our mouth, olfactory, that's our sense of smell. And we have tactile, which is touch and feeling. And then next we have proprioception, which that's just kind of our ability to understand our body and space. So that's one that our ability to move and kind of navigate our environment, like when I sit in a chair, understanding that I'm sitting here and that feedback that that touch is giving me as I'm moving, I'm able to balance and understand that I'm sitting in a chair. And vestibular has to do actually more with the balance side of things. So if I'm standing on one foot, is my body able to provide me that feedback that I can correct my posture and correct my stance when I'm off balance? It has to do with a lot of the vestibulocochlear stuff in the ear, the input that we get back from just different sensory things. And then interoception is our ability to, like, within our internal organs, to understand our different needs that we have, like if we're sick or if we are just ate something really spicy and our stomach does not like that. It's our ability to understand the need to use the restroom. So if our bladder's full, that's kind of that internal organ feedback that we have. I have this example of someone I used to work with. She has a really good example of navigating interoception um, differences for one of her children that she had. And basically, it included they would go to school every single day, and this kid would just run and run and run. He would run around the whole building, and no one could figure out why. He would run around outside, he'd run around in the classroom, and everyone was just like, why is this guy, this sweet little guy, running around everywhere? And they finally, one day, my friend took him into the restroom in the morning, and he totally just sat still through the whole class after that, like all morning long, and everyone was like, "What's different about today? What do we need to know? Like, how is he just sitting there and he's not running around, he's being still and tentative to instruction." And my friend hadn't caught on to it at first, and so the next day they didn't go to the bathroom, and again he's running around everywhere. And then Amber, my friend, she was thinking about, what did I do last time yesterday that I didn't do today? And she thought, oh, I took him to the bathroom. So she tried that again the next day at about like halfway through the morning. She took him to the restroom, and again, he was totally fine throughout the entire rest of the class. And so that's just an example of a kiddo that had the inability to identify his sensory needs internally, like within his organs. Like he had to go to the restroom, but he just didn't have a way to communicate it other than just running around. He felt uncomfortable and antsy, I'm sure, as if any one of us would. And so that's just one example of just a difference or a way that um, interoception can be a challenge for someone. So our first scenario is my child often kicks and screams when we're out in public, and the teacher reports he's often not paying attention in school. So I want you to think of a kid you know who could fit into this scenario, who might kick or scream or not pay attention in school, and just try to think of that kid or group of kiddos or several kiddos you've experienced that have this challenge. And try to keep it in your mind. And we're going to revisit this back at the end of the presentation to kind of talk about some tools that we can walk through for that. So same thing here, try to think of someone you know. For scenario 2, which is my child can't sit still for more than a few minutes. He or she is always on the go. And then there's some little pictures. And then the third and last scenario is my child has a high pain tolerance and frequently crashes into things, hangs upside down, and plays really hard. I'm sure we all know of a kiddo or someone who has these tendencies. So before I get started kind of breaking down just sensory differences or just behavior in general, like I just want to make it clear that all behavior is communication. So whether you're a child or an adult, all behavior is ultimately communicating something. So the way children perceive their environment through their senses can sometimes be perceived by parents or teachers or therapists as maladaptive or difficult behavior, such as running away, hitting, screaming, chewing, biting. So all of these things basically point to the fact that the child's trying to communicate a need. And so when we give the children outlets or ways to communicate, this can alleviate some of these things, or if we can just identify some of their sensory differences and provide them specific tools for like things that they can take into different environments, that can make a world of a difference for every single kid. So again, I just want to reiterate this point that maladaptive or difficult behavior can be tricky to navigate. So I just want to say I hear ya. We all have those kiddos who they have like self-injurious behavior, or they're distracting or hurting their peers, they're destructive to their environment. And so um, it can be really, really difficult, and I just want to empathize with each one of you, especially if it's reoccurring or is destructive, like I was saying. But what the child, I want you to keep an open mind, an open perspective when this behavior is happening, because ultimately this maladaptive behavior can be communicating a sensory difference. So I want us to just keep our minds open in those scenarios, try to remain calm and try to understand, try to keep track of when does this behavior happen, what is it communicating, and what are ways that I can prevent and or keep this behavior from happening. So I'm going to kind of go into those strategies for the rest of the presentation. So I hope that can be helpful. And this is just a fun little picture here that kind of explains how, it further explains how our sensory system helps us to navigate our environment. So just kind of think about this little girl in this image. She's at the beach. It's dark outside, so visually might be harder to see. She probably is feeling the sand in between her toes, so that's the feeling, the sensation between her toes. I bet you she can hear the sound of the waves crashing, and so that's kind of that auditory feedback that she's getting. Might even help her to be calm and help her regulate. And then we've got those beautiful colors. That's some visual input in the background of the sunset. And so those are just kind of picking apart different ways that there can be multiple sensory inputs in any environment that can be our bodies either trying to understand or regulate or take into account, things like that. So my next point is just kind of breaking down hyposensitivity and hypersensitivity. I'm going to start off with hyposensitivity here. These are just kind of general descriptors to explain how someone experiences sensory differences. So hyposensitivity can be described as less sensitive in one or more of the 8 senses. So individuals with hyposensitivity often don't sense input as easily as most people do. So for example, if your kiddo needs to touch everything, they're brushing against the walls, they're touching people, they're crashing into things, they're feeling, you walk by a shrub and they're feeling, every single leaf on the shrub, they're feeling the tree, the need to move or fidget when they're bored. Um, Children with hypersensitivity are often unaware of pain or they'll have messy hands and a face because they can't feel it as much as some people can. They also often might seem to ignore parents or teachers. That might be that auditory difference where they don't receive that auditory feedback as sensitive as some kiddos do. They might have poor hand-eye coordination and they might crave certain smells or textures. They might need more input than most. They might have poor body awareness, so kind of like I said, crashing into other people. They crave jumping or spinning, and some kiddos also crave like chewing on objects. So this is where the chewy toy can be helpful, but this is just some examples of hyposensitivity. Again, these kiddos are less sensitive um, than most in all of the sensory areas. So these are just kind of some generic tips on navigating hypersensitivity, different tools that you can give a kiddo who, crashes into things or is constantly feeling and touching things, providing a sensory bin that has different textures in it and allow messy play breaks. Messes are okay. I know we all want to make sure our kid is the most clean, put together thing ever, but getting messy can actually help our brain to better understand our environment, but also to help us navigate ourselves when we can better understand what we're getting ourselves into and we can feel it and get messy. Weighted blankets or vests can be helpful as well. Fidget items can help children to focus in classrooms, but also at home as well. Um, Deep pressure, I've seen this used in the clinic before. It was more in a preschool setting, but we had this young little girl who she would just cry, cry, cry every time during circle time. And she was one who was very hypersensitive. So she would always fall, crash into things, running around, but she did really, really well with some deep pressure. So she had a helper who sat with her during circle time in the classroom. And she would what we finally figured out was just if we could just squeeze her joints. So we would just apply light pressure to like her elbow or her hands or her wrists and just kind of give that rhythmic pressure, that would help her. It would be a game changer for her. Like if we could just have her para or her helper be with her the whole time and just give her those light squeezes, that was literally what made the difference for her to participate in circle time, which was huge because it's just those little tiny things that you don't think about or you might not notice. You're thinking, why are they crying? Why is she so upset? And it's just because her body needed more input. Just sitting in circle time wasn't enough for her to be able to regulate or to be able to navigate and just sit and be in her environment. She had to have that extra pressure. So, that can be super helpful, as well as allowing time for movement breaks. So, like taking a walk is great. I know I need that half the time. Um, Also, a table easel can allow children to stand or work from a different position in classrooms. So, if you have a mover or a groover, someone who's going all the time, it might be more helpful for them to stand to stay focused on their tasks. Chewing gum can also be helpful or providing chewies. Like I know chewies can be, they're pretty popular in the younger pediatric setting, but as you kind of get older, kiddos in high school or off into adulthood, just giving them chewing gum to just help them just constantly chew. I know I love chewing gum. It literally helps me to just be moving my mouth to be focusing on things better. Um, and then a beanbag chair or wiggle cushions, those can be helpful, especially in the classroom setting as well as heavy work activities. So I know around the house, like providing chores for your children to do. So like for example, laundry, if you give them a basket to just carry, hey, can you carry this for me? And then you give them a basket of clothes and they can go all the way down across the house and just giving them that extra input, that extra physical input can be huge and just helping your kid to just feel more not as restless or not as fidgety or squirrely. That brings me to the next point, which is hypersensitivity. So, this is kind of the far other end of the spectrum. Hypersensitivity is a heightened sensitivity to one or more of eight senses and may also demonstrate frequent fearfulness or apprehensiveness. Um, so, for example, the child may be distracted by loud noises. Like right here, we have a little girl who's covering her ears. They might be sensitive to fluorescent lighting, overly distracted by classroom decorations. They might be sensitive to food textures or brushing teeth. They may also avoid messy hands or face. I know this is me all the way. I don't like it when sticky things are on my hands, and I hate it when things are touching my face. So I just like to keep it minimal. Um, this is also a lot of kids with hypersensitivity will sometimes avoid hugs or physical contact. And so it's important to just be aware of that and not take it personally if you're the caregiver or if you're just a friend or a helper of the kiddo, just understanding their sensory needs might just be different than yours. It may also avoid or be uncomfortable with fast movement. So things like riding tricycles might be uncomfortable for them, or running around with their peers. They might be, the kiddo who's playing off on the side, just standing there with their friends, and he's not wanting to run around on the playground with a bunch of other kids. And that's totally okay because we all have our own differences and our own preferences. It's just important to recognize those. And I'll kind of go into some tips for how to navigate that in the next slide. So, some tips for navigating hypersensitivity. Um, I'm sure we all know those kiddos who might be a little bit more withdrawn or remove themselves from loud environments. Some helpful things can be to use headphones to block out loud background noises. I know that that also made a world of difference. At the same preschool that I talked about a couple slides ago, we had another girl who she could not stand being in circle time or really any type of group activity. It just like made her, you could just tell it kind of made her more, she was just kind of more apprehensive in her environment. She would pace back and forth and she would often go to the opposite side of the room. That was her communicating, I'm uncomfortable. There's too many loud noises. It took us quite a few weeks to figure out that it was the noises that were overwhelming her. But once we kind of narrowed that down, we're like, let's just try some headphones. Maybe that might help her to regulate herself a little bit more. And once we gave her those headphones, she literally would come into circle time. She would interact with the kids. She would play the games. It made a world of difference for her. And it was just so cool to see how implementing those little strategies can make such a difference for kids and can be the total difference for them. For being able to engage with their peers and engage in the classroom setting. Be huge, huge difference. Um, Another helpful thing can be verbal or visual warnings before loud sounds or before you're going into a super bright room or before you're going into like the lunchroom before cafeteria, like, hey, 5 minutes, we're going to lunch. It's going to be really loud in there. So just begin mentally preparing your kiddos since before they go in. So these kids can have difficulty regulating things themselves, and sometimes they need adult help and support to help them to do that. So some other tips can just be adjusting or providing dim lighting in the classroom or at home. So I know that there was this one classroom I went into, it was awesome. They had no overhead lights on, and they literally strictly used lamps because we figured out one of her students had just like a lot of visual, um, very hypersensitive to visual feedback, and so she went all out for this one student, which I just love. And her just placing those lamps around the room was still enough light for all of the students to be able to see and complete their schoolwork, but it provided an environment that was more calming and less distracting for this one particular student that allowed him to complete his work alongside his peers. And so that was just really cool too to see that difference. Um, Unscented markers can be helpful and trying to stay away from perfumes or lotions and soaps and things like that. Um, Yoga stretch breaks, deep breathing exercises, providing a safe space, like taking a break outside for fresh air or just a familiar. I know some classrooms or some, even within some playrooms in homes, have like a little sensory corner where kiddos can go and have a break. They know it's a familiar spot they can always go to. No one else is going to be there, or they can invite a friend if they want, and they can just kind of have a second to regulate themselves. And that familiarity can also help individuals who are hypersensitivity as well, as well as just quiet rhythmic activities like swinging or walking can be really helpful. So, going back to our first scenario, I don't know if y'all remember or if you thought of a kiddo who really could relate to this scenario, but it was my child often kicks and screams around public, and the teacher reports are often not paying attention at school. So, what the child may be communicating in this scenario is that, they might be saying, all the noises are overwhelming, I can't regulate myself, or there are too many people around and the lights are too bright and I'm having trouble focusing. So that would be auditory example and a visual example. It could be several different things, just kind of depending on the kiddo. But some potential solutions here would be providing headphones or trying moving into a less crowded room. So that's kind of like my example I shared last slide of our girl who giving her headphones to be able to participate in classroom activities made a world of difference for her. Providing shades to reduce light glare, providing an area to go for quiet, calming items. So it's kind of like that. Some classrooms or play gyms will have like a little sensory corner. So that can just be that same, familiar place to a child who needs to have those toys that they can constantly go back to. Oh, this is my favorite snapping toy, and I love the way it sounds. And that can just kind of help them to just kind of focus on that sound and then get, their focus back on and then go back out into the environment or gym or classroom or wherever they're at, to just kind of be more regulated. So that familiarity can be huge, for kiddos. Using a timer can help kids to maintain their attention to the task as well. I know I need timers to stay on task. And so I know that can just be absolutely beneficial for kiddos, and it can give them a deadline like, hey, within 2 minutes, I want to try to finish this worksheet, or within 2 minutes, I want you to be finished putting up the dishes. It can help them focus. You can even make a fun game out of it, and trying to get them to beat their last record. Oh, how fast could you put away the laundry last time? Let's try to see if we can beat it. That keeping things like that or implementing things like that can help kids to just stay engaged. You just kind of got to go through trial and error because every kid is so different. Some kids may like a game, some kids may want a little more time and space. So just kind of go through some of these solutions with your kiddo or potential clients or things like that that you might be working with. Sensory breaks in the schedule can be huge, kind of like I said about giving them that same sensory area, then also providing warning before transitions as well. So, kind of thinking back to that scenario two application, I'm sure we all had a kid that we can think of who is just a mover and a doer. It says, my child can't sit still for more than a few minutes. He or she is always on the go. So I'm sure we all know someone who's a runner who needs that constant movement. They're always fidgeting in their seats. Some things that they may be communicating not verbally, but through their actions would be, I feel uncomfortable with my body in space. I'm unsure how to sit still. Or this chair is too hard or too big and I'm unable to get situated. Another scenario would be like, I've been still for too long and I just simply need to move. So, some potential solutions here could be providing different seating options. So, I know that there's some like those little saucers that are kind of like circle, they're purple, little like wobbly circles, just putting that in a seat can be huge. We had several kiddos in our preschool who we would just add those to their seat and they would sit in them and it would help them. They could just wiggle, 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 but it would help them to stay engaged in their their tabletop activities. So that was really cool to provide some different seating options. You want to make sure that the kids can sit and fit in their chair. If the kiddo is sitting in a huge, adult-sized chair. There's so much room to move around. That would be uncomfortable for anyone. As just as I, an adult, don't want to sit into a super tiny chair, a super tiny kid's chair. Just giving the kid the optimal fit of a chair can be huge for just keeping them engaged in mealtime at home or tabletop activities in the community and other environments. So also allowing movement breaks, so going on a walk or use of fidget toys. Again, that deep pressure, so just a light squeeze on the hands, the elbows, shoulders. And then I love this next point about seeking out activities in the community or at school that provide both movement and socialization. So, for example, playing at the park or being involved in a sports team could be huge for these kiddos. Um, Sports teams are great because it allows your child to go and move, run, 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 and also it gives them that socialization piece too, where they get to do it alongside their peers. They get to be engaged with other people, and sports are great because it provides an outlet for our movers and our doers to do what they love most, which is move and do and go. It can also be really fulfilling for kiddos to just have that involvement and that connection with other peers. It can be fulfilling to have that outlet where they can just be themselves and just move in the way that they want and need. Um, Another helpful thing could be to adhere to routine or refer to visuals. So I'm a list maker. I love making my lists. Adhering to routine can be helpful for anyone, no matter who you are, especially kids. When they know what to expect in their environment, they know what's coming up next. That can help them to just kind of take things one step at a time and might even help slow them down a little bit if they know what's coming up next. And then referring to visuals, so visual schedules, things like that. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So this is the last scenario 3 application. My child has a high pain tolerance and frequently crashes or runs into things, hangs upside down and runs into things. It's a typo, sorry. But so I'm sure we all have the kid in our mind who crashes and runs into things. They might have a high pain tolerance. So if these kids, you might notice they fall down a lot or they have scrapes on their knees or legs, they might not even know. Just because they fall, they get hurt, it doesn't feel, these kiddos are hyposensitive, so they can't feel things quite as intensely as other people do. So when they get an injury, they might not be aware of it in the same way you and I would be. So they have a high pain tolerance. You see them fall a lot, but they're okay. They bounce right back up and they keep going, going, going. What they may be communicating is, I need more sensory input to help regulate myself, more physical input as well. So that could be touch or proprioceptive. This or if they crash into things, they might be communicating like, this pressure on my body helps me to stay focused and regulated. So kiddos who are communicating this might benefit from like a heavy, like a weighted vest. They might need that extra input to just kind of help them breathe and get that extra like physical input to help them to um, regulate themselves and be present in their environment. So other potential solutions here, again, back to that deep pressure can be really helpful for kiddos like this. Jumping or bouncing activities can be really cool. So maybe even getting this child involved in gymnastics or in some type of uh, like yoga class, stretching class can be really, really helpful to kind of help them calm back down and get that input, that physical input. And then again, children with high pain tolerance who are frequently crashing into things need to be educated on safety, and they also need to be educated on personal space. So I think that's something every child needs to be educated on. Those aren't things that you're just born knowing. You have to be told um, and explained that everyone needs their own little space. We can't run and crash into everyone. Um, and then also what can be helpful are swing breaks. So I know some classrooms or parks or home environments are really great and ideal for kiddos that have difficulties with this because they can just get on the swing, have that little motivator, that swing break to kind of help them stay engaged in more like functional and purposeful activities after that. And then heavy work breaks, visuals or social stories to redirect that behavior, and then also monitor the child's body for injuries and scrapes and cuts and things like that. So these are just some general tools and an overview, some helpful tools across all environments. So kind of referring back to some of those same things I said on the previous slides of keeping a basket of preferred or familiar or sensory items on hand. This can be particularly helpful during like wait times when your child doesn't have something to do. So you're at the grocery store, you're waiting in line and you've got a fidgeter, a mover, a doer. But if you have your, just a basket or a bag of just familiar toys for your child, that can help them to just be focused on the toy and fidget with that instead of per se, maybe fidgeting with the person next to them's hand. So just things like that can help them to stay back regulated on sitting in the line, paying attention, things like that. And then educating all children about personal space and appropriate touch that can just be applied to every kid in every scenario ever. As well as adhering to a routine and providing visual schedule and timers to help with transitions. Again, I'm going to touch on visual schedules in the next slide, but routines are huge for kids. When their expectations are made clear, it makes a world of difference. Observing the time of day and location the child struggles. So this can be helpful if you have just taking a pencil and paper or just keeping a note on your phone. If you're having particular difficulties with a child who's having challenging behaviors, keep note of when those behaviors are happening. Just whip out your phone, put the time, 2 p.m., Sally ran around the classroom, and then just take observations of things that are going on in her environment. You know, um, 3 kids came into the classroom and they were being loud, or the lights flickered on and off. That could be an unexpected thing. The teacher didn't give clear instructions. So there can be multiple stressors or causes that contribute to behavior. But observing the time of day and location, keeping a log of all of those times can be helpful to narrow down and identify what that child's particular triggers are. So that's something that I would suggest to anyone in any environment, whether you're at home, in the school, in the therapy setting, anywhere at all, that can help to identify and minimize triggers or stressors for kiddos. As well as I kind of hit on this in all the slides, just keeping children engaged and making the expectations clear. When expectations are made clear, you're adhering to the schedule, you're using timers. That structure helps kids, it helps adults, it helps everyone. So just those are just some simple tools and hopefully things you can take with you into your environment, whatever setting you're in, to just help children to be more regulated and more engaged. So here I've provided some pictures of visuals that you can use in, daycares, wherever you find yourself, just providing that schedule. This can be great if you just print out a piece of paper, get an image of all of the tasks on hand that you want the child to complete. You get those laminated, you put the Velcro on there. You can even see with this first image here on the left, you can have the child move the image from the left to the right once they've completed it. And that's even a tactile input that can help them to be like, oh, I finished this task, on to the next one. That can help them get used to, oh, here are my expectations, and here's how I can show that I've completed it. That can be fulfilling for the child as well and help them to be regulated and stay on task when they know what the schedule is. They can visually see it, they're getting that tactile input, and having that explained to them in multiple ways can be huge, especially if kiddos are nonverbal or have difficulty communicating. This can be a great way for them to understand the schedule and for them to kind of like check off that list per se that they have themselves. And then up here in the top right, those visuals, those are just little like kind of cutout cards you can provide your kid with, or if your child has like an AAC communication device, giving them those little ways that they can communicate to you, oh, I want my fidget toy, or oh, I need to go for a walk, or I need water. Those are just all helpful communication tools that children can use to say what their sensory needs are. I love the first then schedule. This is probably the most simplistic one, that picture at the bottom there. Just really simplifying it down. This is great for super young kiddos or children who really just need that concrete first, then. First, we're going to read the book, then we're going to play with Play-Doh. So typically you start the schedule with something that's a little more challenging, like a homework or a worksheet, something like that, maybe chores. And then you put the then, which is something that's a little more rewarding. So Play-Doh, play break, snack, something like that to keep that child engaged and motivated. It's a great way to communicate those needs and can give that visual input to the child so they can understand what their expectations are. And then I just love this quote from Winston Churchill. It says, a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. And so I just want to use this as an encouragement to you, whoever you are, whatever setting you find yourself in, that every challenging behavior that a child could have is ultimately an opportunity or invitation to better understand the child of a need that they're communicating, that they might not be able to identify themselves or they might not be able to verbalize. And so I just want to use this as an encouragement and recognize all situations are different and hard and they all present their own difficulties, but ultimately it's all an opportunity to be invited into a deeper level of intimacy in that child's life and being able to provide them the supports that they need to succeed in any environment. These are some references that I found for this presentation. Thank you for listening and for participating in this little lesson today. I hope that it was helpful. I hope you could take at least a couple things away with you to just help to better understand either your kid or clients or students, things like that. Wherever you find yourself, I hope that these are helpful tips and things that you can use in your everyday life and that can help your kiddos. So, thank you.